Thank you to all of you for plugging into this panel, but it would not be possible without the generous support of BCU Financial Credit Union, BCU Foundation. Thank you for the contribution without which this Congress and this session wouldn't have been possible, and so I'm pleased to introduce Nadia Gereluk to open this session on behalf of BCU Financial and the BCU Foundation.
Щиро дякую. The BCU Financial and BCU Foundation are proud to support the panel on the future of defense. It's the courage of Ukrainians defending their sovereignty that inspired the global community and brought forth global lessons. Often, those global lessons are reinforced by local action. BCU Foundation is proud to support those defending and those who have defended Ukraine in the past, as it's not something we do, it's part of who we are. We're deeply committed to humanitarian efforts as well, from providing aid for Ukraine in the form of ambulances, medical supplies for surgeries, and funding prosthetics to soldiers in need. Since its inception, BCU Foundation has dispersed $22 million. And it's all thanks to donors and members like you. Thank you. But here in Toronto, BCU Financial Credit Union partnered with charities to provide emergency assistance in the form of bunker gear. BCU Financial supported local settlement services for newcomers, funded Ukrainian schools and education programs, and provided financial assistance to camps across Canada for children arriving from Ukraine to truly integrate and have a little bit of a relaxed time here in Canada. We awarded scholarships that help the next generation thrive. Our goal at BCU Financial and BCU Foundation is to strengthen our community and sustain a nation that has so bravely fought and continues to fight. So, дуже дякую, щиро вам дякую за ваші пожертви на фундацію і дякуємо нашим членам. Бажаємо вам чудової панелі.
And indeed, Nadia, it's going to be pretty easy to fulfill your wish for an amazing panel because we do have an amazing panel. And I'll just very briefly introduce them. The Honorable John McKay, 9-time MP for Scarborough-Guildwood, former chair of the Standing Committee on National Defense, currently working with David Pratt and Associates on defense procurement and related issues. Dr. Katheron Intson, who is a defense scientist, serial entrepreneur, and specialized in advanced unmanned systems. Then Andrew Poticznyj, who is probably the Canadian who has delivered the most pointy stuff into Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken, over $100 million worth over the last 3 years, and so has a very practical appreciation of what's at stake. And then Senator Rebecca Patterson, who comes from a distinguished command background in the Royal Canadian Navy, retains a very active interest in Canada's defense matters, and therefore can give us a perspective on, from a sort of a command point of view, on what's happening both in Ukraine but also in Canada's approach to it. One of the things that the Standing Committee on National Defense did is many study tours, reports trying to build a framework for Canada's approach to defense globally, and that includes NATO's eastern flank and most notably now Ukraine. John, we had speeches here from the Defense Minister, Mr. McGuinty, last night from Foreign Minister Anita Anand. They said many supportive things and announced continuing support, but do you see some sort of comprehensive vision behind what it is that Canada is doing with regard to Ukraine? Or could there be some greater clarity and crystallization happening there?
I'm assuming this is on. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. I would like to say that I'm from Missouri on this, but I'm actually from Toronto. But for those of you who know the reference, Missouri, people from Missouri are inherently skeptical. And so I come from that camp of inherent skepticism. As an apologist for the government of Canada, I'm pathetic. I think we can always do more. I would hope that both ministers encourage the group here to believe that more is being done. And I have to say, even for a skeptic, the last budget was encouraging. It is the first time in 27 years that I can recall a budget that was focused around defense. It is the linchpin of the budget. So industrial strategy is related back to defense, productivity strategy, infrastructure strategy, et cetera, all come focusing back on defense. So is there some basis for being more encouraged that Canada will participate at a greater level? I think there is some basis. You know, there's $22 billion in the pot at this point, of which 14, 15 is financial assistance, humanitarian assistance. Six or seven is direct military assistance. There's another couple billion in the budget. I was told that there's a couple billion more, but I can't find it. So I'll go with 22, 23 billion. It's not nothing. Is it enough for a country such as Canada with a GDP such as we have? I don't think we should be taking too many victory laps on something of that nature. Having said that, as a formerly practicing politician, Ukraine's not very high up in the basis for people's moving their votes. It may be in diaspora communities, it may be in diaspora communities where the diaspora can influence the vote. But from where I come from, east end of Toronto, that was not a high issue. And I can't frankly recall many conversations about it. I can easily argue the geopolitical significance of this conflict and the critical importance that Canada needs to take a active, I would say, a greater role in its assistance. But as a practicing politician in the eastern part of Toronto, not a high priority thing. So, you know, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? I saw some pretty encouraging signs in this budget. I think that, you know, Andrew and Karen will maybe talk about some opportunities that are there yet to unfold. What will we be talking about this time next year? Will it be opportunities that for Canada-Ukraine cooperation that are manifest, or are we still be talking about the same thing? I don't know.
Got it. There's some space for further consideration there, and we might come back to it then. Senator Patterson, you've been at the implementation end for decades when it comes to Canadian defense policy. Money is great, very useful to make defense operations run, but it also requires concept, right arc, left arc, many other things. Do we have that?
Depends who you ask. And I think by that I mean, if you're looking within defense, defense, both Canada and within NATO have been planning for years for this very specific scenario within the North Atlantic Treaty concept and knowing who the aggressor was going to be. So I think you're talking more about a say-do gap, because there's a budget, but then you actually have to get the money across the start line and then you have to spend it. So I think can plans be ready? Your Canadian Armed Forces is very flexible and very agile because we've had to be. But I think what is going to be more important now is getting the budget passed, which is, I mean, it's great to say we have a budget, but we don't have a budget. It's going to vote this coming week in the House of Commons. And then the next thing has to be the actual commitment of the funds and the action on the plans. And of course, we know it's working in a very bureaucratic system, a system that's built not to spend money, right?
We're kind of notorious, actually, for lapsing money in defense terms. And when people, we're talking about, Ukrainian defense needs to be reformed, like, I think the last thing Ukraine should be burdened with is Canada's defense procurement system. We could actually do Ukraine like a favor by not even mentioning it. So would there be scope for something like a major projects office to get defense stuff as well as Ukraine-related stuff up and running?
So absolutely, and that's when they're talking about the Defense Investment Agency, and the wording's changing. So I can tell you that Canada, during the 10 years in Afghanistan, had to figure out a way to circumvent the system, and this is really where the rubber hits the road, because soldiers, sailors, and aviators were dying waiting for equipment to get there. So, I mean, the systems exist. So I'm going to watch very closely what this agency is going to look like, because it really is a regulation to a certain amount, legislation component to actually make this happen. And the Ukrainian component would be included in there. And I think I saw, again, it's in the budget, has to be passed, but the 6 point whatever billion looking at strategic partnerships, including with Ukraine, in order to actually get the money out the door. So my hope is this is going to happen, but as we like to say in the military, hope is not a course of action, doing is the action.
Got it. Speaking of doing, Andrew, you've done a lot of doing, and you've seen how the Ukrainian armed forces and defense structures have managed to create very quick turnaround times for tech, where you have direct from battlefield reports being factored in within weeks, as opposed to kind of the years-long cycles that people in North America are used to. Do we have a kind of a culture clash when people from steady state system like ours try to interact with a dynamic battlefield situation and people in Ukraine kind of in 24/7 contact with the front?
So I have a very long answer that I'll go through, but I just want to start by saying it's not my work, it's our work as a global Ukrainian community and the diaspora. We have donors from more than 70 countries now, so it really is a global effort and a united effort. And Paula said a lot about our project during his speech, but I just want to mention that none of our work would be possible without the support of our partners and donors, and one of those long-standing partners is Ukrainian Canadian Congress, its leadership team, member organization staff, as well as local UCC branches who continue to stand in solidarity with Ukraine. Unite with Ukraine works inside Ukraine's defense apparatus. We operate systematically and directly with the command structures of various Ukrainian defense forces. We coordinate with brigades, battalions, and even individual units and pilots to tailor equipment procurements such as matching FPV drones and fixed-wing kamikaze bombers to specific geographic or mission profiles. We strive to procure exactly what units need without any guesswork or listening to too many salesmen. We're strategically integrated into Ukraine's defense ecosystem, and we work together with them to ensure effectiveness. This is how we're able to deliver tangible results with speed and accuracy. For the most part, our initiative is not a humanitarian project because, let's be honest, you can't win a war with food boxes, wood stoves, clothing, blankets, and children's toys. An unequivocal victory requires the right tools in the right hands at the right time, and that's exactly what we do try to do. Now let's contrast that with the government of Canada. Canada brings scale and long-term structure, but it's heavy, slow, and very bureaucratic, yet vitally important. Canada is capable of multi-billion-dollar, multi-year commitments, major equipment supply, training missions, industrial support, NATO, G7, EU coordination, that really determines the ceiling of what Ukraine can do. And as someone who's worked and lived in Ukraine for the better part of the last 4 years now, fully immersed in Ukrainian bureaucracy, with this seemingly never-endless paper document and wet stamp regime, it pains me to say that Canadian bureaucracy is often more cumbersome. This is why initiatives like ours and other defense-focused NGOs, such as Poticznyj Foundation, Poticznyj as of one, all of whom we regularly collaborate and coordinate with, are essential part of the big picture. Together, we're able to bring agility, precision, embedded coordination with Ukraine's defense institutions. We operate on timelines that we measure in days and weeks, not in years. We work unit by unit with defense structures to close capability gaps today and not next year. I think the West needs to stop treating Ukraine like a student. The mindset of we teach, we supply is frankly patronizing, outdated, and strategically dangerous. Ukraine is the global center of innovation in modern warfare. Unmanned systems, electronic warfare, dispersed operations, and rapid iteration cycles. Western militaries are often a decade behind Ukraine's adaptation tempo. It's simply inaccurate to claim that we are teaching Ukraine modern warfare. The reverse is actually true. Ukraine is teaching us, and we're still not listening fast enough. Pretending otherwise is wasting valuable time and will cost Western lives. NATO and Canada remain indispensable, however, but NATO's decision-making and procurement systems are far too slow for the tempo of drone-centered unmanned warfare and Russia's terror tactics. Something that was relevant and trendy 2 months ago can very easily be completely irrelevant and useless today. War is brutal, but it is fluid, dynamic, constantly changing and advancing. Our initiative and similar mechanisms demonstrate how agile and networked support can fill critical gaps while institutions slug through their long processes. If NATO can't manage to stop 50 Shahed drones over Poland, while Ukraine literally that same night neutralized 700 using innovations developed under fire, then NATO and the West must begin adopting Ukrainian doctrine and Ukrainian technology as quickly as possible. Using F-16s, F-35s, and expensive precision missiles to shoot down a swarm of relatively cheap drones is neither realistic nor sustainable. NATO structures were built for the last war. Ukraine is fighting the next one right now against a genocidal terrorist regime, and our institutions are reacting too slowly. For this reason, Canada must hardwire Ukrainian innovation into our own defense ecosystem. Canada should champion and support Ukrainian-Canadian joint ventures in the militech space. Ukraine is pioneering modern warfare, particularly in drones and unmanned systems, and the West should be collaborating with Ukraine at scale, like Katheron's company is doing. I only know about their work with special forces, but if you're going to work in Ukraine, work with Ukrainians. Canada should fund and de-risk joint ventures in drones, electronic warfare, and unmanned systems. Canada should create a fast-track pathway for co-development and co-production and export of battle-proven Ukrainian technologies. Canada should use Ukraine's frontline insight as a real-time requirements sensor for Canadian research, development, and procurement. If Canada was wise, we would place a priority on co-developing the next generation of unmanned systems together and in partnership with Ukraine. Joint research and co-production should focus on FPV drones, reconnaissance platforms, Arctic-capable UAVs, counter-UAV systems, naval and ground systems, electronic warfare, autonomous and AI-powered technologies. The benefits are clear. A significant leap for Canada, innovation leap for Canada, industrial growth for both countries, faster procurement cycles, and international export potential. Joint ventures with Ukraine are the most effective and efficient way to modernize Canada's defense industry.
Okay, Andrew, we'll get back to you. I think this might be a moment to segue right to Katheron. Andrew set out a very ambitious agenda for collaboration, especially in UAVs. You represent that sector in Canada. Canada, by and large, is a country that has a lot of excellent military tech component makers, but not a whole lot of end product integrators. We tend to integrate into other countries' systems. What are the niches then that you've managed to seize, and what more could Canada and the Canadian ecosystem do to be a partner for Ukraine, but also to do what the government is very much setting out as a priority, which is to develop Canadian-based systems using Canadian-based technologies and materials?
There are many parts to your question. But I will start out by saying that with the exception, some carve-outs for, things in the Arctic that are have much different conditions than the battlegrounds of Ukraine. When it comes to offensive capabilities, if you are not innovating with Ukraine, you are creating things that are simply subsidized by the government. Because in the last 10 years, warfare has changed dramatically. We have almost 100% replaced artillery on the battlefield with FPV drones. And last time we had an innovation that big was artillery, which first started coming out in the 1700s, okay? So we had 300 years to change procurement and strategy. Now, within just the last 10 years, FPV drones have taken their place. And so I actually think that the change that we're undergoing now at the government level is kind of right on time, and we couldn't expect anything different because of how quickly warfare changed. That said, we do have to make that change quickly, and we do have to learn from Ukraine. When we were developing the capabilities of our systems, it was something that we approached really thoughtfully. So our chief technical officer, for example, hung out in Russian Telegram channels for 18 months using ChatGPT to translate everything into Russian, and actually learned a little bit as well along the way. I'm cringing as an Estonian. But he pretended to be from Zala Aerospace, which is a big drone manufacturer in Russia. And from there, he was able to pinpoint one of the capability gaps, both in Ukraine and in the West. And it's pinpointing those niche capabilities rather than approaching the Canadian Armed Forces and asking them to help you find a way into Ukraine. You have to forge those relationships yourself as a Canadian industry, and you have to innovate at the edge using creative mechanisms and pathways in order to find something that is good for Ukraine and for the battlefield as a whole. So I would say that the Canadian kind of opportunities are twofold. One, we have to start monitoring the Arctic. It's pathetic that the Americans have been doing this for us. And for all that's been said about the American government, they are getting us to spend on doing that finally. But the other area is in the offensive. We cannot just be good at monitoring the Arctic. So what are we going to do if the folks at our northern border decide that we're worth invading? Are we just going to be like, well, we have the best C4 ISR platform on the planet. It's like, okay, well, that's great, but it's really those sort of collaborations and joint ventures with Ukraine that are going to put us at the edge of the offensive. And I'll just finish with this. We've lived in a wonderful time of peace, and some of the folks in this room may be thinking, okay, but surveillance is all that we'll need to do going forward. The Canadian Armed Forces have always been exceptionally trained. I have never met a member of the foreign military who ever described our CAF as anything more than like less than capable, collaborative, and highly competent. And that's been in large part for the way that we've been trained. And now we have to dramatically change the way that we train. And a huge part of that is in collaboration with Ukraine. And Canadian industry needs to make sure that they are at the forefront of that, not simply producing American systems and American IP as a subcontractor.
Thanks for that. I guess, could Canada become a Sweden or a Denmark, which sounds a bit strange because these are countries that are either 4 times smaller or 6 or 7 times smaller by population, but in terms of their very clear profile, both in terms of developing their own indigenous defense capacities and in the way that they are presenting a very clear profile with regard to Ukraine, are kind of a model, or at least it's easier to understand what they're up to than what Canada is up to. So, John, the Swedish royal visit is coming up on Tuesday. I would suspect that it's not unrelated to a sales pitch for Saab Gripen fighters, which most notably there's been a letter of intent signed between Sweden and Ukraine to produce over 100. We've seen reports now in the Canadian media saying that unused Canadian aerospace capacities could be used for manufacture if some kind of trilateral Canada, Sweden, Ukraine relationship could be developed. Is that real? Is the potential there? Should we aspire to that, or are we just not Swedish enough?
I don't know what Swedish enough means, but I do have an image which I think is very attractive. We used to be Sweden and Denmark after World War II. We were a serious military industrial player during and after World War II, which capability we've let go. And we, in effect, cashed in the peace dividend post-World War II, and we've cashed that check so many times, it's pretty well worn out at this point. Can we? Yes. We apparently are going to have a few auto plants that are available, which is a depressing thought. But so we do have industrial capacity, and we do have a government that's motivated to develop that industrial capacity. Will it be the Sweden Saab Bombardier marriage made in heaven? I don't really know. Bombardier is a very, very capable player in that aerospace. I just put in a pitch for something that I think we have neglected in our enthusiasm, and that is the training that's required to be an aerospace engineer or a marine engineer or things of that nature. Our community colleges have been sideswiped by, if you will, public policy whiplash, and even in this budget have been neglected, and yet they are obvious candidates for training, and there's not a snowball's chance in hell that Canada will develop a military industrial capacity without training from those folks who can actually make things, build things, design things. Again, is it half full or half empty? I don't really know. I share Andrew's skepticism and frustrations with the bureaucracy. I know something about money that lapses, but can we turn this around? Some of the indications in the budget are that we can turn it around. There is an actual organization being set up and stood up in military parlance for direct military procurement. Will Andrew be as frustrated this time next year as he is this year? I don't really know. But they are consolidating their procurement processes and hopefully speeding them up in the process. Does that lead us to a real capacity in several areas? I hope it does. I know private money is far more extensive than public money. I know dual use is a way to go, particularly in the Arctic. So maybe we're going to marry a bit of urgency with reduced bureaucracy. I guess we can all live in hope.
Okay. Senator Patterson, I think I heard you quietly mentioning the Canadian Armed Forces being a whole bunch of MacGyvers improvising with less than perfect options. I think maybe you could say that Ukraine is like a MacGyver country.
Absolutely.
Working its way through and extracting the maximum from sort of value for money equipment. Canada, I know, has an order in for billion-dollar Predator drones to cover the Arctic. Is that the only option? Is it, instead of $1 billion drone, could we have 1,000 and $1,000 drones, which Katheron would make appropriate for the Arctic? How do we kind of adapt to a new world where our resources are not unlimited, but the threats are increasing?
So I'm going to hit this indirectly like a good sort of politician. And so I think a couple of points here, like if we talk about the Arctic. So the Arctic is a massive expanse of land, 2 time zones. If you've never been there, I mean, you have less people there than the population of Prince Edward Island, which is 135,000 people. Canada is the second largest country on the face of this earth with a population of about 40 million people. We are a federation of loosely constructed provinces and territories that sometimes, plus or minus, listen to the government. And you have competing priorities. So when we're having a look at where we're going now, I'm going to start in Canada and go from there. Because at the end of the day, if Canadians don't believe that investing in Ukraine benefits them, it's going to be a hard sell. So to start at the very, very top, I'm going to say that we have had decades and decades of people talking very importantly at a local level, the me, I, what I need in my space. And that will always remain very important to Canadians. What has to change from the top to the bottom to the sides from the bottom up is this is about us and our future sovereignty. And Ukraine is taking the burden for the world right now in democracies that we believe. And the conversation in the Arctic needs to change. If you flip the globe on its end and look from the North Pole down, holy heck on a stick, does Canada ever have a lot of Arctic? And like I said, a tiny population in there. So when we're looking at taking the best lessons with Ukraine, Ukraine is a peer. It is a peer. And if you think about where the West has been realistically since the end of the Korean War, it's been in Cold War, which is basically deterrence and defense. And as the Cold War ended and, woohoo, everybody was excited and we cashed in our dividends, the West has participated where we have always been the superior force. And this is our mindset. And Ukraine comes along fierce, fierce, warned us, warned and warned and warned that this was going to happen. And so, of course, when the West started going in and looking at Ukraine, and I think you brought a very important point, Andrew, is we had the same assumption that we were going into Afghanistan. And it's taken the West, and Canada in particular, quite a mindset change to say, these are our peers. And the one thing about war, it is the mother of invention. So taking what, if I use drones again, and for our Arctic, we need to be able to tell Canadians dual-use technology that we're going to spend the money on there. We need to take the best of what Ukraine has to offer. We have to remember that Canada is a North Atlantic, an Arctic, and an Indo-Pacific nation, that whatever we purchase for Canada has to be able to adapt to all those environments. But where the juice is in this squeeze is working directly, collaboratively, and in partnership with Ukraine to learn the best, so both sides benefit, and then making sure that can be adapted to those environments. So let me go back to drones in the Arctic. I have a lot of visits from defense organizations, and one of the challenges is distance. So new submarines have to, when they're not nuclear, have to have range, meaning they have to be able to go forever without refueling. Drones, from a power source perspective, knowing that most of the threats in the Arctic right now are over the horizon from space down to subsurface, has to have drones of all abilities that can handle environmental conditions in the north and have power to be up in the air long enough to be useful. Not just attack drones, but surveillance drones. And this is where we can learn great lessons from Ukraine and then adapt accordingly. And this is why with Canadians, when you're looking at spending that money, what is in it for both of us? So if I reiterate, it's a mindset change for Canadians to say, this is our peer, this is our partner. We can learn, we need to share. And then I believe that that is how we're going to best benefit Ukraine, because we can get a cycle going. And I think also best benefit Canadians. And I just had one last point in there. I have to talk about fighter jets. So it's a very, I will be part of these visits with the King and Queen of Sweden. It's a very interesting concept that royalty has been used a couple of times in Canada, from Speech from the Throne and now as a constitutional monarchy. And we do know this is going to have this very pithy discussion about Griffin fighter jets, plus other things that they can do. But I also think we need to talk about survivability for Canadians in those three environments. The Griffin jet is a good jet, but it's a 4.5 generation jet. The F-35, like it or not, is 5th generation. Why does that matter? Because generation 4.5 is like flying blind. And Russia right now, their MiGs sit about that level. And if you split a fleet in Canada with a teeny tiny force, your ability to maintain, do supply chain management is going to be challenging. So for smaller but massive countries like Ukraine, the Griffin fighters for now, because you will be, I think, going F-35 as well, is a very, very good transition aircraft. So I'm going to be very interested. I do not make decisions in this government, but making sure that we have survivability for Canadians so they can go into against Chinese 5.5 generation fighter jets versus, what else is out there is going to be very important. Very indirect answer to your question, but I wanted to get those points out.
Okay. I think we'll get back to directness here with Andrew. You've probably got another couple of direct points you want to make.
I want to just address something that Katheron said. You had said, if our neighbor to the north decides to attack, I think we need to start thinking not if, but when, and be ready for this in advance, so you don't have partially to what the senator was saying. It's incredible how quickly Ukrainians are able to move. And I was just thinking about how in early 2023, about 15% of the components used in our Ukrainian manufactured UAVs were domestically produced, and the majority of the critical parts were being sourced abroad, mainly from China, which became a huge problem. But in just less than 2 years, by late 2025, that figure has now surged, and I can only speak to our production, but we're now at nearly 80% Ukrainian-made components. I don't know if there's many countries outside of China and now Ukraine that could actually make this kind of transition in 2 years. It's incredible. But it reflects not only industrial scaling, but something that is uniquely Ukrainian, which is a relentless wartime-driven innovation cycle that compresses years of development into just months. It's a testament to the extraordinary speed at which Ukrainians are able to design, adapt, and produce when your own survival depends on it. There's another aspect to all of this, which is interceptor drones. So this is basically a type of warfare which simply didn't exist 2 years ago. We got drones shooting down other drones with interceptor drones, which is like a crazy thing to even say, but it's arguably the most effective means of drone defense across all of the front line. Ukraine now leads the world in low-cost, high-efficiency drone interception, and essentially they've invented a new, highly effective but cost-effective system of air defense. I think Canada would be interested in also having these capabilities. Interceptor drones are critical for energy infrastructure, ports, airports, overall homeland defense, and co-producing Ukrainian interceptor drones is essential for Canada's own future security. I think the future of Ukraine's defense exports is already very clear. We've talked about it a couple of times. Ukraine is positioned to become the major global defense exporter built on real battlefield innovation. Ukraine is producing rapidly iterated combat-proven platforms that outperform currently legacy NATO technologies in most cases, or in some cases. Ukraine is developing in some areas already successfully using AI-enabled targeting, which is a huge thing. I mean, I think probably everybody in this room has noticed that everybody at work just uses ChatGPT to do their work for them. So, I mean, AI is the future, and we got to embrace it. We can't hide from it. The other thing that Ukraine is on track to do is become the world's major exporter of defense knowledge. Canada should position itself as Ukraine's top partner, not as a late customer coming into a fire sale. Ukraine is not only fighting a war, but it's building the defense technologies and training systems that the world will rely on for decades to come. We all need to stop thinking in terms of donating to Ukraine. This is about investing in and partnering with the world's leading innovators in modern warfare. The future of global defense is being written in Ukraine by Ukrainians right now. Canada needs Ukraine's innovation as much as Ukraine needs Canada's resources. The smartest move we can make is to build this future together. Canada needs Ukraine, and Ukraine needs Canada. And together, our cooperation will shape the defense capabilities that the democratic world will rely on for decades to come.
So basically, in addition to money, which seems to be in the offing if a budget is passed, we need to apply thinking to shaping the cooperation. And I think even there, we've occasionally been stymied by, relatively small policy dialogue projects that kind of plug us into the senior levels of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry sitting unsigned on government desks, which means that experts then go unpaid, and people wonder, Canada, how serious are they actually? So it's not just stuff, it's the relationships, it's the plugging in, and the recognition. I think and I guess Andrew in a way is now a kind of a manufacturer in his own right, or as, okay, it's not just you, in their own right. More broadly, all of you who have helped contribute to Unite with Ukraine. is plugged into a new Ukrainian private sector ecosystem, which came out of Ukraine's, on the one hand, very dynamic IT sector, and on the other hand, its legacy industrial base kind of combining into generating that kind of innovation mechanism that we have. So, Katheron, do we have some of the same preconditions here? How would you build that private sector to private sector defense industrial bridge to Ukraine, apart from pretending to be somebody on a Telegram channel?
Well, I just wanted to start by sort of threading the needle here by some other comments that my colleagues here have made, which are like, okay, so we've talked a little bit about the Arctic and about how there are these amazing systems, and if we just go out and procure these amazing systems, it will solve a lot of our problems. But we're still really talking about surveillance. We're still not really talking about the offensive. I'm not mansplaining to a retired vice admiral, but I will say that like we're still only talking about surveillance. And so I will get to the industrial part of this question. But the first thing that I would change if I were in charge of government would be that we need to start taking a little more pride in the capabilities of the Canadian Armed Forces. So for a long time, we've sort of hid in the shadows. We've like quietly been the best snipers in the world. And we've, supported other operations around the world. And to my knowledge, there is every intention of continuing that. But because we don't talk about it, people seem to think that we're like Sweden and, we take this sort of surveillance perspective. We're not super involved with the Americans. We need to start talking a little bit about how good the CAF is at doing what they do and why it's important to stay on top of that. And it's important for a couple of reasons. One, if you're known for being a good collaborator, that buys you a lot of good relationships and goodwill, which means that people are more likely to protect you when you're in trouble, which means that if Russia attacks you, you will have allies to come in and support you. And that needs to be more talked about more. And so that type of messaging will encourage us to stay on top of the offensive, because it's attritable systems, not billion-dollar drones that survey the Arctic. It's these attritable systems that will be required for training and for overseas operations that are really going to be the backbone of the industrial base, because it's the stuff that people keep reordering that are going to lead to those long-term contracts. And so when I look at the defense industrial base, yes, we have this legacy of working with the primes and subcontracting out a lot of the manufacturing of things like the F-35, things like the MQ-9. And so we should continue to do that because those are great products. But also, when it comes to working with Ukraine, it's this FPV, offensive, counter-UAS type work that has led the charge and led to so much of their success on the battlefield. And so we do also need to talk about that because the CAF needs to train, the CAF needs to run some of these operations overseas, and that's the big contribution that Ukraine can make, like in terms of export of defense knowledge, to Andrew's point. Like that's where where they've been so innovative and what's enabled them to have such success in war. And so the relationships between Canada and Ukraine should really focus on the offensive and the industrialization and winter hardening, if necessary, Arctic hardening, if necessary, of those systems and of that strategy. So when we build up the defense industrial base, we also need to think about the offensive.
But we don't have to rename D&D Department of National War?
No, I think that our public education is such that, Canadians we're a little bit smarter than the average American, right? So,
Ooh.
And so we just need to talk about the fact that we need to stay on top of things. We don't have to call it the Department of War and try to, convince people we're at war.
But I think it is true, in fairness, that yeah, Canada is quite discreet about what it does, and in fact, even just wandering the streets of Kyiv and identifying the odd Canadian military officer I know from my past, there's more going on than we are publicly being told. So there's partly Canada is not publicizing absolutely everything it does, which is as it should be for operational security reasons. But this, one of the things that I've noticed in Ukraine, and I think Andrew's probably dealt with them as well, is an outfit called Brave One, which is a kind of integration unit between defense, department, Ministry of Digitalization, the tech side, and then the private sector. Is there scope, in fact, for trying to bring something of that structure, and maybe I'll throw that question open to anyone on the panel, to Canada? So in addition to saying, okay, we're not sure where our policy advice project for Ukraine is, where is the Ukrainian policy advice project for Canada in terms of some of these accelerator features and working across silo features that Ukraine has managed over the past couple of years?
I'm just going to say that, so the U.S. has this as well, so maybe we should frame it in the context, because our government tends to copy the things that the Americans do, not the things that the Ukrainians do, sadly. But I would just say that I would equivocate, Andrew, please correct me if I'm wrong, but Brave One and the Defense Innovation Unit in the U.S. share a lot of similarities, and I think that if we take those two examples to government and say, you know, this is how it's worked for both countries, I think we have a much stronger argument for creating something like that at home.
And as we know, I mean, our partnership with the U.S. has an 80-year history. And so this is 3 years in, and I do believe we will always retain that partnership, but we will evolve, and this is where Ukraine has a massive role. So this is where, when we can all be talking as members of civil society, and especially a group as strong as those in this room, can start saying, no, we want to have this kind of a collaborative advising to the Canadian government, and here's a model that could work. And the one thing I will add is, in that group you're talking about, I have to give a shout out to Canadians of Ukrainian heritage and Canadians of whatever heritage have stepped up and walked into Ukraine. I'm going to just put a little tiny shout out here. And I have a quote for you that came from someone who's been working, and again, because of the means of communication, unlike certain people, we do not ever disclose location. But as they've said, I have been in the far, far east again doing my small part. The team I am with loses dozens and dozens of their people every single day. I often wonder how our beautiful country would fare with today's society if we had to pay such a price for freedom. And why is that? Because you have Canadians inside, just like yourself, who can go out and talk about you need to do things differently. You need to have a collaborative approach to receiving advice and structuring government. I do believe we're at a point right now, an inflection point, where we can actually do that. And it's a case of bringing forward these models in order to say, this is working in a rapidly evolving society.
So in a way, it's part of the diversification that the government is looking for. And John, how do you see this being done practically? Obviously, you know, we can't just say we're having the odd issue with the U.S., so replace it with Ukraine as Canada's lead ally. That's artificial. That won't work. But how do you kind of bring one in without necessarily alienating the other?
I don't know whether you can not alienate these days. I think this elbows up stuff is has sent a message. Let me just reference that by analogy. So in 1941, President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Mackenzie King stood up the Permanent Joint Board of Defense. Anyway, essentially, it was a transition of Canada's security arrangements from the British Empire to the American Empire. For the last 7 years, I had the privilege of chairing that board. And this group would be extraordinarily impressed by the quality of interaction between the Canadian military and the American military, reinforcing Katheron's core point. We have a seriously good military. It's maybe not the biggest in the world, but the quality of the people is bar none. And the Americans treated the Canadians with a respect and a peer recognition that may or may not have been afforded to other countries. All I can say is that. So to your question, is this time for a permanent joint board of Canada-Ukraine? As, if you will, the opportunity to get the people in the room at the same time to go through various projects and to see what's going to fly and what's not going to fly. I don't know whether that's a good idea or whether there is material, but there's a lot of moving parts here. The budget sort of captures some of it, but the core recognition that Mark Carney has had in initially his advocacy for non-carbon-based energy is that the private sector is far more capable than is the public sector. There's far more money in the private sector than there is in the public sector. And I think with the standing up of that organization, chaired by, I think, Mr. Gaussman, maybe those are the recognitions that the bank, the development bank, Canada Development Bank, got $1 billion in this budget. Again, it's a recognition that the private sector will have a significant role in whatever it is that's going to be going forward. I think this is an opportunity that's rich with possibilities. Whether we will be able to execute on those opportunities, I don't know.
Okay, now let's think about something that might be more knowable. And coming back to Andrew, the Ukrainian situation at the front is quite tenuous right now. If knowing what you know and getting the daily news that you get, what should the next package of Canadian assistance be focused on if we're thinking of what can reinforce Ukraine over the next 6 to 12 months?
That's a tough question to answer because the situation changes on a weekly basis. Catherine's right. Now FPV has taken over shells. So yeah, there's a lack of shells, but they're not really needed anymore. We kind of replaced them with FPV, which is a cheap and cheerful option. I think the biggest thing, the biggest need currently for Ukraine is a missile with a range of Tomahawk. Here we're talking about 2,000, 2,500 kilometer range, where the factories that produce Shahed drones in Russia are located. Typically we, in the media, Western media, and in Twitter and wherever you get your news, you hear about Shahed attacks when they're on Kyiv or Lviv or some of the civilian infrastructure, but you don't hear about the hundreds and thousands that are used daily along the front line. Shahed drones are used like sniper bullets now along the front. If an operator can see a single vehicle parked beside a house in a village within 50 kilometers of the front line, they will hit the house with the Shahed. So somehow neutralizing their ability to produce thousands a day, I think this is very critical, and that will allow the Ukrainians to potentially do a bit of a, I don't want to say counterattack because we went through it and it ended poorly, but this hold the line and maybe push a little bit back without having this constant threat of shaheds. That being said, I do believe if we can hold for a year, Ukraine will have several domestically produced options that will replace Tomahawk capabilities.
Senator?
That'd be awesome. I always listen with rapt attention because this is about people. And that is one of the biggest costs of this war. You can have the best fighting machine, the best drone in the world, but if you have no people, it becomes irrelevant. And what I do want to talk about is other areas for collaboration as well. We know that there are a number of investment funds. And so when we're thinking about what does Ukraine need right now, this has to be by Ukraine, for Ukraine, and decided by Ukraine. And there are, if Canada is putting money into the NATO priority list fund, where Ukraine is the captain of their own ship on this one, I think that's going to be very important because it'll be the only way for them to adapt on the fly for the things that they require. So that would be my thought on, rather than stuff, have Ukraine decide what they need. We will provide what we can, but otherwise put the money in there so they can make the decision. And I need to talk a little bit about people. At the coalface, soldier survivability and civilians, but your fighting force is one of the biggest challenges you have right now. We have drones, we have this, but you have to have a human behind it. So the one thing that has impressed me, because I have a healthcare background, I did military healthcare, and is how quickly Ukraine was able to adapt in almost a Soviet style of fixed medical facilities, because they came to Canada in 2019, I think it was, to discuss with us how to modernize their hospital system, but actually using the old system rapidly to evacuate casualties out. And why does that matter? It's about survivability. So the one thing Ukraine does have that Canada and all Western nations, but Canada in particular, can benefit from is having the means to collect data on casualties. And you're thinking, why would you collect data while it's underway? Because it will always increase soldier survivability and functionality. So Ukraine has done some very innovative things medically. Canada right now is working. We know there's a number of folks in here who deal with Ukraine's key asks, which are under mental health and rehabilitation. Canada has some very innovative products that are already in Ukraine in terms of 3D printed prosthetics, because people grow and change over time. We're looking at other initiatives to bring the prosthetic 3D printing capability to the people, because it's very hard for people to travel, as we all know, because Ukraine has told us that. And then, of course, mental health. So this is where, when you talk about collaborative sharing on the impacts of war on soldiers, the wounded who are out of combat, and families, it is also worth investing in this space. And to me, that isn't humanitarian. That is also part of the big picture of ensuring that Ukraine can survive and eventually thrive again. So I think that's another partnership we need to focus in on. And there is money that has already been allocated under the warfighting capability of $835 million. Bear with me, that's an estimate. That also includes medical capability. So I wanted to add that because the bravery of Ukrainian soldiers, the men and women who are fighting, is absolutely stunning. And just go to Invictus Games. So I think that these are other things that we could partner in on, because Canada is very innovative on the mental health front, because we approach mental health in a certain way that not many other Western nations do, but also in the rehab space. Thanks.
That very much fits in with the speech which we heard yesterday from General Dallaire, and I think would also address some of the mobilization, motivation issues that the Ukrainian forces are experiencing right now. So it's a quick injection of some of that thinking could also help reinforce the line and the people who are holding it. So even though time seems to have gone into reverse on our clock here, which may be giving us the wrong ideas, I would actually then ask each of you, starting again with John, to say, if you had a message from your perspective, how you see the situation for the people in this room, what is it that you should be advocating as Canadians that would resonate in East End, Scarborough, but across Canada, to make that link between Ukraine's need for both stuff, ideas, and people resilience for victory, but also Canada's diversifying, changing defense needs?
A relentless fight against misinformation and disinformation. And that's what I worry about, is the way in which, if you will, the public discourse about Ukraine has kind of fallen off the map while we focus on silliness. And I think that there needs to be a refocusing on the significance of Ukraine to, if you will, the preservation of our way of life. We mean the Western world, and democratic values, et cetera, et cetera. But it needs to be brought down to the level of the individual constituent citizen of Canada. And I think if there was a message that I would like to get out, it is that countering of the misinformation, disinformation exercise primarily by Russia, but by others as well, is an ongoing fight. And this one in Ukraine, it makes it far more challenging to win the ultimate battle if, in fact, you don't have the hearts and minds of the population with you.
Katheron, are you going to encourage people to go on the offensive?
I think if we are faced with a situation where our northern border will either test the waters of NORAD or just flat out attack. And there are only two ways of preventing that. One is to start taking responsibility for the Arctic, which I think we're well on to. And two is to continue to continue to punch far above our weight as an ally in theaters around the world. And the only way that we can do the latter is by taking full advantage to innovate with Ukraine and to co-develop with Ukraine. That is the only way that we will either bring a swift end or head off entirely a conflict with Russia. And I'll mention the Latin saying, si vis pacem para bellum, which is, if you wish for peace, prepare for war.
Andrew, your advocacy priority for this crowd for the next 6 to 12 months?
If I could just,
other than donating to United with Ukraine.
if I could just make one point, because my mother often tells me you're too rough. So I just want to make clear, if I came off maybe a little bit too rough, sounding like Canada's not doing enough, that's not the case. The only two countries that I've ever heard being mentioned as Ukraine's unwavering partners in closed-door meetings with generals is the UK and Canada. So Canada's influence in Ukraine, Canada's work in Ukraine, it's immeasurable. For people in this room, I would say a couple of things. One, if you're doing projects in Ukraine, go. Take the risk, avoid your life insurance. Believe me, it's worth it. A fantastic example is Canada-Ukraine Foundation finally have returned their surgical program to the territory of Ukraine. And really the effect is immeasurable in terms of knowledge sharing, experience. And it is important that Ukrainians see us as literally standing with them, not just making statements and putting out press releases, but like Dr. Antonishin and CUF's team, who traveled to Ukraine to do physical surgeries on real veterans, it's hugely impactful. So that would be one suggestion. Not suggestion, but please do so. We also hear a lot of talk about planning and rebuilding Ukraine and the diaspora's role in that future. Of course, we all dream of a day when we can rebuild Ukraine, as Ukrainians say, "Я тільки за." But before we can rebuild, we must ensure there is something left to rebuild. So, the war has reached now a critical point in which a strategic use of everyone's funds it really does matter. So continue investing in Ukraine's defense, continue investing in Ukraine's independence so that tomorrow rebuilding will actually be possible.
I have the unenviable point of going last. Just as an aside, have you seen that the company in Ukraine that's taking rubble and repurposing it into bricks? Brilliant. We can all use that. For me, if I look into Canada, it's getting Canadians to understand this is about them. And one thing that this group can do is keep it in the public eye in a way that resonates with Canadians. And one thing Ukraine has been brilliant at is cultural diplomacy. Canadians are more responsive to that. So the first thing is get out there, talk about it, be loud, be proud, and say why this is important to Canadians. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to underline it as a 34-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, because it is us. This is happening to us as well. So we need help on that side. The next thing, demand of your politicians to speak clearly. And while it is very hard for them to give a direct intent, you need to understand where they are in terms of their support, plus or minus, for the programs in every single corner of this country for Ukraine. And the next thing is give your government, federal, provincial, even municipal, the ability to make decisions rapidly, push them to make decisions rapidly, especially in defense and security that benefit all of us. Because if we don't, they'll come over the north. That's Rebecca's opinion, nothing official. So therefore, I think there is great potential in this country to keep it in the spotlight. Please be out there, be visible, talk about it, show Canadians why it matters, and I'll support you.
Thank you very much to the panel. And if there's one takeaway that I've got from this, it is the need for Canada to see Ukraine as a peer country. And in fact, to put it in very traditional Canadian foreign policy terms, peer middle power that has shown that it too can punch above its weight, go above and beyond, and that this is something that we, as people who have to maximize the use of our resources for the protection of our sovereignty, need to benefit from, and that Ukraine's victory will ultimately be systemically, in terms of global geopolitics, be Canada's victory. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to the audience.